Hey everyone, how we doing today? This is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit, and welcome back to another video. And as part of the Ask SplitSuit a Question series, a couple people did ask hand history questions, and this one actually came privately via Facebook. And Billy wanted me to review an MTT situation. He said, this hand happened early in an online MTT, only about 10 hands played so far. So let's look at the spot. Okay, so again, this is in the early stages of a tournament, so the blinds are still 10-20. There's an open raise from the hijack, and here decides to call in the small blind with pocket fives. So I want to talk about this for a moment because this is kind of important, and I think a lot of players overlook it. So MP2 in this situation is a 40-20 with a 0% 3-bet, a 0% 4-bet, but again, only about 10 hands. And the big blind in this situation is a 22-22 with a 33% 3-bet and a 0% resteal, but again, those stats are pretty useless over the sample size. Then some players may say, well, it's a 33% 3-bet, that's pretty aggressive, but that's probably 1 out of 3, and it's not really fair to say if that was necessarily a big hand or a weak hand. We can't really know, so I'm essentially just going to treat both of these guys as relative unknowns, although the hijack is certainly shaping up to be a little bit fishy with a 40% VPIP. But all of that being said, let's talk about this call pre-flop. So I think this is kind of important and a lot of players overlook it, but I think a lot of players would perform much better if they were more selective when set mining out of position, particularly against steal spots. And I consider an open raise from the hijack to pretty much be a steal spot from most player types. So the reason why I want to be careful here is really twofold. One of the big reasons is simply because we're going to miss this flop a huge chunk of the time, roughly 88%, and when we miss, we're usually going to be catching something like third or fourth pair on the flop, and it's going to get worse and worse by the time we get to the river more often than not. That's obviously a turnoff. Another thing to consider is the 12% of the times we do hit, one, we're going to feel very comfortable, and that's all well and good, but are we really going to get paid off? We have an opponent who's raising from a steal position, which means wider range. Wider range is not going to be able to hit a strong post-flop. So the rare times that we do catch our set, it's even more rare that we're going to be able to get paid off because he's not going to be strong enough often enough in order to justify him paying us off. So unless he's like a huge aggro and bluff tard who's just going to bluff off his stack a large chunk of the time or massively overvalue something like second or third pair or even like a top pair weak kicker, our implied odds start to drop very, very quickly, which provides a situation where it's kind of minimal upside, and that's not great for us. The other big factor here is that we're going to be out of position, so it's more difficult to play when we miss, and it's also more difficult to play when we do hit. Now, all of that being said, stacks are pretty deep at roughly 150 big blinds to start effective, which certainly makes it better, but it's not necessarily the greatest spot in the world, and again, I think a lot of players overlook this situation. One last little thing to consider is who's left behind you. In this situation, there's only one opponent, and again, I'm kind of treating him as an unknown, but definitely consider who the big blind is and if you're likely to face this kind of squeeze. Because if this were a situation where you called and expected to face a squeeze a large chunk of the time, well, that just makes the call even worse. So in this exact situation, we face the squeeze, get a call from MP2, and here we are. So in this situation, here I decided to call, and I want to talk about this for a moment because I think this is kind of important, and a lot of players will set mine in 3-bet pots, especially when they're closing action, but there's a couple things that we want to consider. So in this exact spot, we're getting roughly 15-16x on our money, given the fact that there's already some money in the pot. There's roughly 15x, with that and considering big blind stack left. So we're getting roughly 15x. Now 15x is something that I consider to be relatively break, or at least kind of right in that medium zone. I don't consider that great by any stretch of the imagination. Usually when I'm set mining, I prefer 20x. I'll take a 15x if I think it's flawless, which means I think that the big blind has a range of hands that's going to stack off every single time post-flop. But we really can't know that, right? It's only about 10 hands. We don't know if he's super nitty on his 3-bet range. We don't really know what the heck he's doing here. We don't know if MP2 is offering any great implied odds or if he just has like a pocket nines and he's also trying to set mine. So it puts us into a really question mark situation where we don't really know, again, what our upside is looking like. So in this exact situation, again, I'm not even sure if calling the steal was going to be best in this situation, and I'd probably honestly just fold here. Unless I really have a feeling that I'm getting a lot of implied odds from one or the other, I'm probably just going to say forget it. I mean, one of the worst things that can happen is like MP2 is also set mining, and Big Blind was kind of messing around, and again, you throw any sort of bluff nonsense in his range, or even like an ace-king or ace-queen, which the times that you catch your set won't always be able to pay you off post-flop. Again, you're just limiting your upside potential, and in that situation I'd rather just preserve my 9 big blinds and move on from there. So again, I can't say if this is great or not great. With the information you're giving me, I'd say probably fold, but in this exact situation, Hero does decide to call. Now Hero ends up getting lucky and flops the set. We'll talk about the hand from here. Check, faces a bet, fold, and Hero decides to check min raise. So I don't mind the check min raise here at all. I think this is one of those where if the big blind has an overpair, he's obviously still not going to go anywhere. I think if he has something like an ace king, ace queen, or a bluff, it gives him enough room to come over the top and shove. I think overall this is certainly doing enough, and again, we don't have enough information to know his barrel tendencies or anything like that. So overall, I think a check min raise is fantastic here. End up getting called, ace on the turn, and Hero decides to lead for 1080. And in my opinion, this is kind of one of the worst turn cards ever, because it's going to slow up the kings and queens and tens and nines if he had those kind of hands as well. Yes, it improves something like ace X, but is he really going to have a ton of ace X, like ace king, ace queen, that kind of stuff when he calls your check min raise? And it's just kind of one of those where the ace does improve pocket aces, whatever. That's just kind of a foregone conclusion. The stacks are going in if he did end up happening to improve on that. But I think ultimately this ace is really a killer and is going to slow down action. And especially when we're betting 2/3 of Big Blind's effective stack, I don't think we're going to get paid off here 100% of the time by any stretch. So rather than bet for 1080, I'd actually probably more heavily consider a check in this situation. Now, Billy did say that he decided to lead out on the turn to protect himself against the flush draw and to get value against an overpair. Now, again, like I just said, the ace kills the overpair mindset, the kings and queens. This is kind of a scary card for those things. And had we just checked here, he checks behind, and then we bet the river, he's probably going to call that and just, pay it off. Whereas if we bet here after check min raising, I'm not 100% sure if we always get paid by kings and queens. Whereas the check could slow him down, he might think we're goofing around and look us up a little bit wider on the river. That's obviously a good thing for us. If he has a flush draw and we check on the turn, he's going to barrel that anyway, I would assume most of the time, try to use the scare card to his advantage, or maybe he just hit top pair. So it's just one of those where I think we make more money by checking here than we do by betting, especially for the size we did. I mean, there's really no bluff room potential for the big blind. So if he does jam, I mean, it's really only going to be decent hands, in my opinion. So in this exact situation, obviously we call the shove. We end up beating ace king, and that's all well and good. But again, I think the pre-flop discussion is really, really important. And I think the flop play is really great. But I think the turn rationale is a little bit soured. And I think that Hero could have taken a different line and still maximized value against big blinds, not only hand this time, but also his entire range as a whole. So Billy, thanks for the great question, and if you or anyone else has a poker-related hand or question, feel free to leave it on our Google Plus page. I'll leave a link for that in the description box. And also please make sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this type of video. So same as always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, good luck out there, and happy grinding.